Hello everyone and welcome to a slightly different video here on the JPonComms channel. We're going to be taking a look today at the wider scope of football. Of course, as you'll be able to tell by the title, we are going to be taking a look at has money changed the future of football as we know it. I mean, it's been a very eventful last 24 hours. Manchester City have just completed a treble winning season, a Champions League, a Premier League and an FA Cup to match that of the 99 treble winning side of Manchester United. And really the big questions are of late, how did they get there? Is it fair that they got there? Of course, they've got these financial charges looming over their head, 115 at this moment in time, and that's not even considering their last few years as well, which are yet to be looked at. So we're going to be taking a look at how money has influenced football and whether it is really influencing the future of football. You know, is the only way to gain success in the future going to be through financial spending? Is it going to be the key determining factor in gaining success? We'll take a look at that in this video. So the first team we're going to be taking a look at is Manchester City, of course, following last night's treble win, and we're going to be taking a look at their development over the years. Back in 2008 they were bought out by Sheikh Mansour and Abu Dhabi, and of course since then history has been made multiple times by them. 4 out of 5 Premier League wins in the last 5 years. Of course, a treble winning season this year, and it didn't take them long to get started either. They've really set a blueprint over the last 15 years or so of how money can impact a team, how to do things the right way once you've got that money. And we've seen a lot of teams kind of follow suit since then. Of course, teams like PSG, Wrexham, Newcastle, all in the last 10 years or so have seen takeovers that have brought them success. Of course, Newcastle and Wrexham, the two most recent sides really, that have gained that kind of national and international exposure because of their success and its correlation to their takeovers. So Man City in particular, last night against Inter Milan, had a significant amount of talent on display. Of course, their bench is something that's been talked about a lot. Kyle Walker, Phil Foden, Riyad Mahrez, Julian Alvarez, Calvin Phillips, hundreds of millions of pounds of talent on the bench. And you have to argue how a teams like Inter Milan are going to compete. Obviously, the Serie A is a very well-funded league, but can't compete internationally with the likes of Manchester City, Real Madrid, Manchester United, Barcelona, Liverpool. You know, it is a key factor in how Manchester City have got where they are. But is it the only one? I mean, they've got a lot of players in their side who perform when needed. You know, they've got a lot of players who will be dropping an 8 out of 10 every single week. And that is what a lot of sides who spend a lot of money don't necessarily have. Let's take a look at Manchester United, for example. In the last 5 years, Manchester United have got a net spend of about £670 million. And the last 5 or 6 years, they haven't really done anything. I mean, obviously they did win the Carabao Cup this season against Newcastle in that final, but really, you know, not a lot to say about their success domestically or internationally since the Alex Ferguson days. And they have spent a significant amount of money, a great deal more than Manchester City as well, net-wise in the last few years as well. Manchester City have only had a net spend of 128 million since 2018. So how they've gone about that is they spent a lot of money in the early days. They went from spending £3 or £4 million on their bigger signings back in kind of 2006, 2007 to straight away jump into 30 million, 40 million for the likes of Robinho, Adebayor, Carlos Tevez, players like that. Those early stage fundings really lifted them up, and that showed, of course, with their first title win just a few years after their takeover. And that is quite a pattern that you see in teams that are getting this big financial backing early on. Of course, Wrexham taken over by the likes of Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenney back in 2021. Didn't take them long to create an incredible historic National League season. So it's right from the top right to the bottom in English football. You know, when you've got teams in non-league who are outspending teams in League 2, outspending teams in League 1, having players on wages higher than players in those respective divisions, going into the National League and winning a title how they did, of course, does obviously represent a significant factor in terms of how money can correlate to success. Newcastle, another team who have kind of followed that mantra, again taken over by the Saudis in 2021, have had a significant amount of success relative to what they were seeing before that takeover. Of course, under the previous regime, the sports direct guy, I can't even remember his name, it slipped my mind. Sean, who you'll see on the channel before, will be screaming at me. It'll come back to me, but under that stewardship, it was really poor. The amount of fan backing that they have at Newcastle to have their club run the way it was previously by the previous regime was really, really poor. And that turnaround, that success, in just 2 years' time, they've gone from a relegation candidate, a team that was in the Championship not too long ago following a relegation, did end up getting Champions League this season. Now, they haven't spent millions and millions more than their competitors for the Champions League spots. They've been a little bit shrewd in their business. They've signed players like Dan Burn, Kieran Trippier, Bruno Guimaraes, this sort of £40 million range and below. And all they've done is just up their squad to a degree which will carry them forward quite subtly. I think they've overshot the mark a little bit this season. A lot of people weren't predicting them for a Champions League finish, myself included, but everyone knew they were going to be on the up. I think they followed that Manchester City blueprint very well. They've tried to avoid the obvious FFP regulations of spending 100 million on a player, spending another 100 million on a player, bringing in loads of money from who knows where and catching themselves out. They've done it in quite a clever way, and I think Newcastle have learned from the mistakes of Manchester City, and by that I mean the 115 charges that are looming over them at the moment. I don't know if Newcastle are going to come across those, just because they've conducted their business in a slightly more intelligent way early on. Now they're in the Champions League, they can use that as a cover to spend even more. And I think in the next few years we're going to see Newcastle become a really, really top competitor domestically. But even internationally, the likes of PSG back in 2011 was sold to Qatar. And since then, they've won 9 of their last league titles in France. They've won 6 out of the last 7 Coupe de Ligue, which is the French equivalent really of the FA Cup. And they have seen a significant amount of success. The likes of Messi, Neymar, Mbappe, all proving very key players financially and, of course, on the pitch for them. They wouldn't have been able to do that without their backing. Their last title win before their takeover was 1994, so it was almost 20 years without a title, and there's really kind of saved and supported by that takeover from Qatar. So it is a very clear indicator, this almost immediate success of financial takeovers. You do start to see the blueprint kind of spreading over teams. Newcastle and Wrexham both learning probably from the likes of PSG and Manchester City on how to kind of relay that money across their squad and develop their team to have the success as soon as possible. It took Man City a few years to get it right, but more recently we're seeing teams get that success pretty early on. Even RB Leipzig in the Bundesliga, they were founded in 2009, not even a takeover. They were actually created as a club. And I know a few German people, and the general attitude towards Leipzig is quite poor. Come out of nowhere, almost straight away, getting that success, working their way up. And now they've won back-to-back Deutsche Pokals as well, which again is that kind of cup competition, big cup competition in Germany. So they are now a competitor, and it's all come from that financial backing. But you can argue that it is not necessarily just the money which gains you success. It has to be done in the right way. It's got to be done intelligently. You've got to get in the right people. And I think, Manchester City with the likes of Pep Guardiola have done that. They haven't just flunked their money. They haven't bought players who aren't up for the project. I mean, the clear example for me is Manchester United. Last 5 years or so, 670 million net, not a great deal to show for it. 80 million pounds on the likes of Harry Maguire, similar amounts of money spent on Jadon Sancho. Where are these players now? But you've got, Manchester City. Okay, they spent 100 million on Jack Grealish. wasn't brilliant last season, even he acknowledges that. But this season, been very influential for them. Erling Haaland, 60 odd million pounds spent. Again, probably the best striker in the world. And it's just how they've recruited and, spent their money. They've got in the right people. They've got the footballing minds to make the most out of the money that they're going to spend. Manchester City have spent 128 million net in the last 5 or 6 years. And the way they've done that is by buying in players who can get them to that next stage. Raheem Sterling is a prime example, of course. Spent a lot of money on him from Liverpool a few years back now. But again, just sold him on to Chelsea for upwards of £50 million and recouped a lot of money, which they can then reinvest in the squad and keep that net spend down. And again, it's just doing it intelligently. West Ham, for example, of course, have just won their first European trophy, I do believe. In a significant period of time. I think there's now 3 European title wins for them across various competitions in their history. But they are the 5th biggest net spender in the Premier League since 2018. £435 million net spend. And of course, if they hadn't won that trophy this season, you could say, and where has that got them? But they've not been a competitor. They've not seen that success on the level of other clubs. And they really haven't got a great deal to show for it. But, again, it doesn't necessarily indicate success, having great finance. You've got to do it right. There is, however, still a lot of cases where, even without great significant amounts of money, it can still be done correctly. And I know a lot of people will say teams like Liverpool have done it right. I'm actually a Liverpool fan, so I don't necessarily agree with that. I think we've spent a significant amount of money. Of course, our net spend's not too high. I think we're in around that 10th, 11th position, but we're still no Leicester City, for example. Now, of course, Leicester have just gone down. They've had their financial issues and things like that. But, in the last 5-10 years, they've gone from a championship team to a Premier League and FA Cup winning side with not a great deal of money, but doing things correctly. Jamie Vardy made his way up through non-league. Riyad Mahrez scouted in from the likes of Le Havre in France, and N'Golo Kante very similar. And they've built this team from the ground up, sold these players on. Unfortunately, the way they invested it just wasn't good enough to keep them up. But, teams like that, teams like Luton as well in the Championship, have obviously done great things. Luton, I think, have the 15th most expensive squad in the Championship, so they're certainly not up there with their competition, but they ended up winning in the playoffs, and they're now going to be a Premier League side. So there is a big argument to be had as to whether it is that football integrity and that passion which can lead teams to success, but there is very few indicators that that is still the case. It does seem that finance and super wealth and blowing your competitors out of the water does seem to be the way forward, at least initially. Of course, Manchester City had that very large injection early on and have somewhat managed to kind of even that out in the last few years with somewhat monitored spending and recouping a lot from sales. But in the early days, they didn't have those players to sell on. And I think with the likes of Wrexham and Newcastle and PSG and other teams like that, Leipzig as well, Real Madrid, Barcelona, these super spenders relative to their level, they are going to keep succeeding. There's no way PSG aren't going to win the next 3 or 4 French titles. There isn't any way that Wrexham aren't going to do well next season. There isn't any way that Newcastle aren't going to be competing again for the Champions League next year and maybe for the title in years to come. So, unfortunately, it does seem that the way football has gone, these teams, these underdogs, these passion merchants, if you want to call it sounds a bit derogatory, but teams who are fighting for the badge are not really seeing the rewards anymore. And although it does sound a bit unfair to say, Manchester City have obviously got where they are because of their money, but they've done it in the right way in terms of who they've recruited because of the players they bought in. Relative to their City rivals, I don't think Manchester United have really bought in many players who are fighting for the badge and a part of the project and very invested on success with the club. They're almost just there for a payday. Whereas Manchester City, despite the money they've spent, they've recruited the right people. They've bought in players who are fighting for the badge. They want to win the top titles across the country, across Europe, and they've done that. And it takes a lot to bring it all together, and of course having the money helps. So I do think that in the grand scheme of things, money has changed the future of football. I do think that you can't just have success now without financial backing, but having passion and fight in your team. I think you need to subsidise that passion and fight with financial backing. Unfortunately, I do think that is the way things have gone in recent years, and I think that's the way it's going to continue to go. But you never know. There is, of course, talks of financial restrictions across Europe. There's salary caps and things like that, which have been brought into other leagues and other competitions, which you never know could become prevalent across Europe. But it's probably going to be a while yet, if at all. So I think things are going to continue as they are for now. So in the comments below, I really want you to let me know how you feel about Manchester City's treble win. Do you think that it's indicative of how world football is going right now? Is money the biggest factor in, deeming teams a successful future? I think it is, but there is still those hidden success stories where, every now and again, teams like Leicester, teams like Luton come up out of the woodwork and do their thing. They get a bit of success. They do enter the limelight. But in terms of that sustained success, unfortunately, I feel money is the only way forward. So, like I say, let me know in the comments below your thoughts. How has money impacted you as a football fan? Do you feel like you're losing a bit of passion for the game? Do you feel like this is the way forward? Do you think that this will only increase the general level of football, make it more entertaining for us as fans? Let me know down below. Do leave a like on this video if you did enjoy. Do subscribe to the channel for more content in the coming days and weeks as well. So thank you all so very much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.